I told an exchange student not to date my son, and it changed everything. I'm 40 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been walking on eggshells inside my own home. I have 2 children, my daughter Liz, who's 12, and my son Toby, who's 19. Saying this hurts me deeply, but Toby has grown into someone I barely recognize. I love him truly, but his behavior toward women has always troubled me, and it only got worse as he grew older. My husband, who is much older than me, always brushed off my concerns. Whenever Toby crossed lines or made comments that weren't appropriate for a young boy, his father would shrug and say things like, "He's just a teenager," or "He'll grow out of it." Meanwhile, I kept watching Toby pick up habits and attitudes that mirrored his father's. I realized far too late that the same patterns that once trapped me were quietly shaping my son. When Toby was a teenager, his fixation on women, especially women who looked different from him, got progressively worse. We once had a young woman as our house cleaner, kind, hardworking, and patient. Toby kept bothering her, trying to flirt in ways that made her uncomfortable. One day, he crossed a line so badly that she reacted and defended herself. My husband wanted to take legal action against her, but I refused. I told him that if he tried, I would file for divorce and make sure people knew what had really happened. I wasn't going to let him twist the situation against her. I gave her a generous bonus, helped her find a new job with a friend of mine, and hired an older man afterward so this situation would never repeat. Toby sulked for months, but I didn't regret protecting that woman. To be honest, a part of me stayed in this marriage longer than I should have because of Liz. She's still young, and I didn't want to turn her world upside down. She already knows more than she should about her brother's behavior. She never brings her friends over because she's told me she's scared he'll make them uncomfortable. It breaks my heart that she has learned to protect herself in her own home. I've always told her she can talk to me if anything ever happens, and she knows I'll always put her safety first. I've been saving small amounts of money for years, little bits of change or leftover grocery money, because deep down, I knew I might need a way out someday. Most people in our neighborhood know parts of my past, including how I was manipulated when I was younger. Because of that, many of them became protective of me and Liz. They help keep an eye on Toby, especially when he's out in public. It frustrates him, but it keeps others safe. Recently, our neighbor hosted a former exchange student named Kimmy. She's incredibly kind, cheerful, and bright, one of those people who lights up a room without even trying. She waved at Toby once, and I could practically see him get swept up immediately. Over the following days, I noticed the 2 of them talking on her host family's front porch. Kimmy also joined us for tea a few times, and Liz absolutely adored her. They bonded over fashion and stories and the kind of animated shows Liz loves, but I had this quiet worry growing in me. Toby was being pleasant, almost attentive in a way I wasn't used to seeing from him. But I couldn't shake the fear that he wasn't seeing Kimmy for who she actually was, kind and intelligent, but rather as something he could idealize or pursue without understanding boundaries. One afternoon, Kimmy asked if she could talk to me privately during tea. With a nervous smile, she asked if it would be okay for her to date Toby. I froze, and so did my neighbor's wife who was sitting beside us. I put my cup down and breathed in slowly, trying to find the right words that were honest but not hurtful. I told her gently that Toby wasn't always respectful toward women, and that he had a history of inappropriate behavior. I didn't hide the truth about why our previous house cleaner left. I explained I had tried so hard to teach him better, but his father constantly undermined me. My neighbor's wife added that some behaviors become deeply ingrained when they're encouraged for too long. I finished by telling Kimmy that if she still chose to date him, I would support her, and I would also protect her if anything ever made her uncomfortable. Kimmy nodded quietly, and I could tell she understood. The next morning, Kimmy stopped by to take Liz shopping. Toby tried to greet her, but she didn't respond. She simply told me goodbye and walked out with Liz. I should have expected Toby's reaction, but I was exhausted. My migraines had been awful and my patience was thin. Toby muttered something under his breath, clearly upset, and I let slip. That's why I warned her. He froze, his face crumbled. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I tried to raise you better, but you and your father kept ignoring everything I taught you. If you want to be angry at the person who encouraged you, not the one who tried to stop it." Toby ran to his room, and an hour later, my husband texted demanding to know why I had sabotaged our son. I repeated exactly what I'd said before, that years of enabling had created this version of Toby, not me. My husband is furious. Toby hasn't left his room. Liz and Kimmy are away and safe, thank goodness. My neighbor offered to come sit with me because he knows my husband might start an argument the moment he walks through the door. I'm shaking. I feel sick. And I can't stop wondering whether telling Kimmy the truth, protecting her, was the moment everything finally fell apart. In the weeks after everything happened, I realized how much of my life I had been trying to hold together with pure hope. When I first posted, I was terrified, shaky, and trying to convince myself I hadn't made everything worse. But as the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, I found clarity. Painful clarity, but clarity all the same. Before I explain what happened next, I want to clear up some misunderstandings, because the responses I received made me realize how confusing parts of my situation sounded. First, Toby is my biological son. I carried him, raised him, and fought for him. I think some people assumed he was only my husband's son, but that isn't the case. Everything I tried to prevent, redirect, or correct in him came from a place of love and fear. I wanted him to have a chance at becoming a good man, even when his father's influence pushed him in the opposite direction. Second, every time I tried to set boundaries or consequences for Toby growing up, my husband would undo it the moment he came home. If I grounded Toby for being disrespectful, he would unground him. If I took away his computer for making a girl uncomfortable at school, my husband would return it within hours. He treated discipline like something optional, not guidance a child desperately needs. Before long, Toby learned that no matter what I said, his father would step in and protect him from consequences. And that shaped him more than anything I did. Third, when Toby was first expelled years ago for crossing boundaries with peers, I immediately sought professional evaluations. I wanted to know if something neurological or developmental could be influencing his behavior. He was tested for several conditions: ADHD, autism, obsessive tendencies, and more. Every result came back the same: neurotypical. There was no diagnosis to explain away what he was doing. He simply had learned harmful attitudes, and the person who should have helped me teach him differently refused to. Fourth, my husband has never been physically violent toward me or our children. I need to say that clearly. But that doesn't mean our home was healthy. The constant dismissal, the belittling, the way he prioritized Toby's comfort over mine and Liz's well-being, it created its own kind of fear. A fear of not being heard, a fear of not being believed, a fear of speaking up because it would cause an argument that would go nowhere. Fifth, many people criticized me for saving leftover grocery money. I understand it might have looked suspicious to some readers, but the reality is far simpler. I took a few spare coins or small leftover bills after shopping. Nothing more. I wasn't taking the full budget, I wasn't depriving anyone. I was quietly building a safety net, something for Liz and me, because deep down, I knew I might need an escape someday. And that day came sooner than I expected. Now for what happened. After Toby shut himself in his room and my husband grew angrier by the hour, I reached a breaking point. The house no longer felt safe. Not because I thought my husband would hurt me physically, but because I knew the emotional storm he was preparing to unleash would swallow both me and Liz whole. I needed time away, to think, to breathe, to understand what direction my life was headed. I packed Liz's bags under the pretense of a short trip to visit my family in my home country. I told my husband it was just a girls' trip, a little vacation. He didn't question it much. Perhaps he assumed I was trying to cool off. Perhaps he thought things would settle when we returned, but I had a different plan. Being around my family again felt like stepping into sunlight after living in a dim room for years. They listened to me. They didn't judge. They didn't dismiss my worries about Toby or my frustrations with my husband. They helped me see something I had tried so hard to ignore. I wasn't protecting Toby by staying. I was teaching Liz that this was normal, that emotional neglect was a household routine, not a warning sign. While there, I connected with two different attorneys from the same firm. They listened to everything: Toby's history, my husband's enabling, the incident with the cleaner, and the increasingly tense environment at home. They confirmed what I had feared for years: my marriage was not healthy, and staying in it was not helping my daughter. Their advice was clear. If I wanted to protect Liz, and if I wanted any chance at full custody, I needed to separate myself from my husband and Toby. They also suggested that I consider speaking to law enforcement about a possible protective order, especially if tensions escalated once I filed for divorce. Making that decision hurt in a way I can't describe. Toby is my son. I love him. Leaving felt like betraying him, even though I knew staying was harming everyone, including him. But I needed to choose safety and stability for Liz above everything else. So I began the process. The lawyers drafted the paperwork. I continued gathering information. I talked to my family about everything that had happened and asked them directly if Toby had ever behaved inappropriately around our relatives during rare visits. They reassured me he hadn't, which was a small comfort amid everything else. For the first time in many years, I felt a sense of direction, terrifying but steady. I didn't know then how complicated the road ahead would be or how emotional the next steps would become. But I knew one thing with certainty: Liz and I deserved better, and I finally had the courage to reach for it. When I returned to my husband's country after the trip with Liz, I felt a strange mix of strength and fear. I had legal guidance, support from my family, and a clearer understanding of what needed to be done. But stepping back into the same city, the same streets, the same environment where everything had fallen apart, it made my chest tighten. Still, I reminded myself that I wasn't returning to be his wife anymore. I was returning as a mother determined to protect her children. I already had a plan for where Liz and I would stay. A close friend of mine, someone Liz trusted and liked, offered us a room in her home. She lived closer to Liz's school, which made the transition easier. The moment we walked through her door with our suitcases, I felt lighter. Not completely safe yet, but protected. I wasn't alone anymore. 2 days after settling in, I served my husband the divorce papers. He was furious, more shocked than anything, but this time I wasn't there to absorb his anger. I was miles away, with Liz beside me and a friend shielding us. I knew the storm would spread, but I didn't expect how quickly things would escalate. Only 48 hours later, I received a frantic call from Liz's school. Toby had been seen outside the gates, pacing back and forth, visibly distressed. Before I could even process the news, they told me the police had to step in because he became overwhelmed, shouting and crying in front of students and staff. Witnesses later described him as heartbroken, confused, and emotionally spiraling. He was detained for trespassing, not arrested, just held for safety, and taken to the hospital for a psychological evaluation. The moment I heard that, my heart dropped. As hurt as I'd been by his behavior, I never wanted him to reach this point. I rushed to the hospital, but they wouldn't let me see him at first. They said he needed to be stabilized and monitored. What hurt me even more was that my husband never showed up. Not once. Not to speak with doctors, not to check on his son, not even to ask how Toby was doing. The nurses mentioned they tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I remember sitting in the hallway with my hands trembling, feeling this painful mixture of guilt and heartbreak. No matter what Toby had done, he didn't deserve abandonment. When the hospital finally allowed me in after his initial evaluation, I found him sitting on his bed, knees drawn toward his chest, eyes red and tired. He looked so much younger in that moment, like the little boy I used to carry on my hip, not the teenager who grew into behaviors I couldn't control. The moment he saw me, he burst into tears. Real, shaking sobs. He kept repeating that he didn't know why he behaved the way he did, that he didn't want to be this person, that he didn't understand himself. I held him while he cried, and for a moment, all the heaviness of the past few years, the arguments, the fear, the tension, faded. All I could see was my son who needed help. He was placed in a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold. During that time, specialists evaluated him thoroughly. For the first time, real professionals were looking at his behavior not as typical teenage acting out, but as something deeper that needed care. When his diagnosis came in, I learned Toby had a mixed personality disorder. The doctor explained that he showed traits of 2 different conditions that impacted his emotional regulation, his sense of self, and the way he handled relationships. Hearing that broke me, not because it excused everything, but because it finally gave context to so many years of confusion. Toby wasn't just acting out or being rebellious. He was struggling, and his father's refusal to address it only worsened everything. During one of his therapy sessions, where they allowed me to sit in, Toby apologized through tears. It wasn't a defensive apology or one filled with excuses. It was raw and honest. But I also knew I had to protect Liz and myself. I gently told him that while I was proud of him for wanting to get better, I needed space. I couldn't be his full support system, not when Liz was still so young and already handling so much. I reassured him that our relationship wasn't over, just changing. I would stay in contact, but not constantly. A voice message or a video call every now and then, something steady but safe. To my surprise, he understood. He even asked for help finding ways to continue school from afar, so I sat with him and looked into online classes he could take once he was stable enough. The doctors agreed that Toby needed a more structured environment, somewhere he would have therapy, support, supervision, and peers his age. I told them clearly that returning to his father's home was not an option. I knew if he went back there, all progress would vanish. So we began looking for a residential program, a therapeutic facility designed to help young adults develop healthier patterns and coping strategies. Meanwhile, silence from my husband continued. Not a single call asking about Toby, not a single message asking where Liz was. Nothing. It was as though once he realized things were no longer under his control, he simply shut the door and walked away. Those weeks were emotionally exhausting. Every day felt like I was balancing on a thin rope, trying to support Toby's healing, protect Liz's sense of safety, and navigate the early stages of divorce. But as painful as it was, I also began to feel the faintest sense of direction. For years, I thought breaking away from that home would destroy our family. Instead, stepping out was the first time I truly saw hope for all of us. It has been a few months since everything settled into place. At least, as settled as life can be after your entire world reshapes itself. When I first wrote about my situation, I never imagined I would reach a point where I could speak with a calmer heart, but here I am. Things are still challenging, still emotionally heavy at times, but there is stability now. Hope too, and that's something I never want to take for granted. The first major change was work. Once I moved out and gained enough distance from my husband, I realized I needed to build a life for Liz and me that didn't rely on anyone else's decisions. I applied for part-time jobs, something flexible that would let me earn money while still being present for Liz. Thankfully, someone hired me quickly. The job isn't glamorous, but it's steady, respectful, and gives me a sense of independence I was missing for years. And the woman who offered Liz and me a place to stay has been incredibly kind. I cook, I help clean, I contribute in any way I can because her generosity carried us through a very dark time. Liz is doing wonderfully, though I know she carries more inside than she shows. She's 12, still a child, but old enough to sense the emotional weight around her. I've started looking for a therapist for her, so she has a safe place to talk about everything, the divorce, the move, her fear of her brother, the stress she hid for years. Liz deserves to grow without the shadows that once filled our home, and therapy feels like an important step in giving her that freedom. Now, Toby. I want to speak about him carefully because his journey isn't a straight line and won't be for a long time. After his diagnosis and his emotional crisis, the doctors helped me arrange a placement for him in a residential program. It's a shared dormitory, 4 young adults to a unit. He has his own room for privacy, but he's surrounded by structure. Daily routines, staff support, therapy sessions, and opportunities to learn basic life skills he never really had. The first week he was there, he told the counselor he felt safe for the first time in years. Hearing that made me cry. Not because I agreed, but because it showed he was finally recognizing his own emotional needs that had been ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood for so long. Toby now has 2 therapy sessions a week, plus access to a counselor in urgent situations. Together, we decided that weekly video chats work best. He gets emotional support without becoming dependent on me, and I get to see his progress without compromising Liz's stability. Some weeks he's cheerful and motivated. Other weeks he's quieter, overwhelmed, or frustrated, but the important thing is that he is trying. He's even enrolled in online spring classes for next year. Small steps, but meaningful ones. As for my husband, or I suppose I should say ex-husband, since that is the direction everything is heading. When the divorce proceedings started moving, I expected an uphill battle. But then something surprising happened. His own lawyer apparently told him that he had very little chance of winning custody or gaining an upper hand. There is too much evidence, years of emotional neglect, enabling behaviors, and multiple character witnesses who saw how the household functioned. The situation with Toby, especially his hospital stay, reflected poorly on him as a parent. And courts tend to prioritize the well-being and safety of a minor, Liz in this case. So my husband made a choice that stunned me. He filed to terminate his parental rights to Liz. When I received the notification, I reread it several times, almost unable to believe it. It was a strange mix of relief, shock, and sadness. He didn't fight, he just gave up. His rights aren't fully terminated yet. The courts still require a process, but he has supervised visitation every 2 weeks in the meantime. He rarely shows up. Sometimes I think he believes not showing up will speed up the process. Other times, I wonder if he simply doesn't want the responsibility anymore. Regarding our finances, the lawyers explained that because I had proof of emotional and financial mistreatment, and because we never had a prenuptial agreement, the division of assets will likely favor me. I have no desire to fight over belongings. I already collected the few things I cared about, personal items, memories, small heirlooms that mattered to me. The rest he can have. I don't want physical pieces of a life I've already worked so hard to move beyond. Our next court meeting is scheduled for December. Part of me feels anxious, but another part feels ready. I'm surrounded by support, my neighbours, my family back home, and even people from the internet who showed me kindness when I needed it most. I still wake up sometimes with a knot in my stomach, thinking about everything that has happened. Trauma doesn't disappear quickly, even when life improves, but overall I feel like I'm finally moving forward. One sweet surprise came when my old neighbour handed me a letter from Kimmy. She apparently recognised parts of my story online and guessed it was me. Her letter made me smile and laugh. She's doing well, living her life fully and sending her love. It warmed my heart more than she probably realises. As I write this final update, I'm not claiming everything is perfect, but for the first time in many years, I feel like I'm living, not just enduring. Liz is safe, Toby is getting help, and I am rebuilding the pieces of a life I thought was lost. Thank you to everyone who supported me, truly. This is likely the last update I'll make, but I'm ending it with hope.